MMA is a passion, a lifestyle, a religion. If you're into MMA like I am, then your spot for everything MMA is the Las Vegas Fight Shop.
2 locations, one at Miracle Mile behind Planet Hollywood, and the other at the Fashion Show Mall.
Las Vegas Fight Shop carries all the cool MMA brands: Affliction, Tap Out, Silver Star, Skin, Extreme Couture, Bad Boy, and dozens more. It's the Las Vegas Fight Shop. And mention ESPN Radio 1100 or DC and the Sunshine Man. You get 10% off your total purchase. I love the mix because of the personalities. You got a lot of strong personalities. You got stubborn guys between Dana White, Frank Mir, and Roy Nelson. It's very volatile because, we know that, Dana is the boss. He has his thoughts. He also speaks on emotion sometimes right after fights. Mir is like this ultra confident guy. He's stubborn. Roy is clearly stubborn about his conditioning. After the fight last week, which Mir rolled in that fight to a unanimous decision, 30-26 on one of the scorecards, you could see him lining up with an excuse about his weight because he gassed. He's too heavy. But he came out and started talking about the fact that, it was just a tactical error.
I would say Frank won just because he actually out-wrestled me. I brought Dan Hardy in for my wrestling this week, so... As we can see, English wrestling is not as good as American wrestling.
All right, funny stuff. We'll get to the wrestling point. Then this week, we find out that Roy was sick. He went to a hospital, was diagnosed with walking pneumonia. Maybe it was, the signs of it were coming on about 3 weeks ago. Then Mir goes on and wanted to react to this stuff where Nelson was saying, hey, I'm going to rework the body. Frank was strong. I just need to get stronger.
So for Roy to want to, at 34, he's going to be 35 this month, try to redo his whole body. It's like, I think it'd be easier shot to go 205. And I think that his half guard would come back. He would do a better job with that. I think his takedown defense, his mobility, his footwork, because he is quick, and the power he does have, I think, would retain and go down because he's not going to lose any muscle, because I think physically he is a 205-pound guy. He's just a 205-pound guy with a tire on.
All right, so we know we're very familiar as we start the clock, these 2 minutes of having the spare tire. We're also not required to go 15 to 25 minutes. That's what happened, right? He gassed.
He did, and I think part of it is Frank Mir was the better fighter. Dana White was very harsh on the fight, and he ripped both guys, particularly Frank Mir. And I heard him saying, hey, it seems like I'm always smashing Frank Mir. I thought Frank Mir fought okay. He landed a lot of very serious knees in that fight, and I thought he had a smart game plan and he controlled the fight. The point that Frank makes though is interesting about Roy. I think. Can Roy get to 205? I just find it hard to believe because, that's losing 25% of his body weight almost. Not quite, but, in that range. And if you get to 205, look at the guys who are at 205. They're more athletic. They're faster. They're stronger. I think it's a tougher division than if you're in heavyweight where, you have some guys that aren't quite as athletic and quite as fast, quite as quick.
You listen to Shane Carwin talk about his fight coming up. Shane is stronger, but he's not bigger. You can get stronger by, believe it or not, losing 20 pounds.
Well, I think Dana made a great point at the post-fight press conference, and I didn't see this picked up a lot, but Roy was talking about bigger, stronger, faster, and Dana cut in and said, "What about getting to 240?"
Exactly.
And I think that that's exactly it. Hey, Roy, maybe Frank Mir is a little bit exaggerating by saying get to 205. You're just not going to go from 265 with Lord only knows what waist he has to 205. That's just a rough thing to do. But I think Dana White made a good point. Hey, what would Roy be at 240? I think he'd be. He already is a very talented guy. Put him at 240, and he's a bigger issue.
Better shot, 205, 240, neither. I agree. His next fight, he may weigh in at like 257. That's how much weight he'll drop.
259 3/4. That's what I'll say.
He's a stubborn dude. 170 picture is pretty interesting. We're going to get to the fight that's been booked for here in Vegas. It's Kevin Iole and Steve Cofield. Reynolds is helping us out. It's the MMA Insiders, our MMA show, every Friday night between 6 and 7. I know MMA fans are impatient. You can start the clock. I look at the 170 division as intriguing. I think there are lots of fights out there. If you give it time, George is not going to fight every month. Give it time. Other guys will step up.
The division is not a bad division. It's the fact that George St-Pierre is so good. If you take George St-Pierre out of the mix, then all of a sudden it's a totally different division because, now you got a lot of really good fights that can be made. But George dominates everybody, so everybody looks at it as from the champion and are there competitive fights with the champion. There just aren't right now. There's nobody out there that's competitive.
But there will be. That's my thought. Do you disagree? To me, a champion can reach a level. And I actually think George is plateauing a little bit, and I think the rest of the field is losing that mental fear and slowly catching up.
I think you're, hoping for what you want to see. I mean, I wish you were right, but, what did Jake Shields do? What did John Fitch do? I mean, these guys didn't come close to winning 1 minute of one round.
There's more well-rounded guys coming, though. And I know right now we look at guys like they're ranked.
Who right now would you say is anywhere close to a title shot that is remotely better than John Fitch, let alone George St-Pierre?
I don't have to say right now. It's a year from now. It's 9 months from now.
Well, give me a guy that's remotely close.
I think some of those guys who are moving up the charts.
Who are some
I'm
going to
name them. I think Jake Ellenberger. I think Rick Story. I think Rory McDonald eventually. I'm not saying they're ready now, but what you need against him is everything. You got to have takedown defense. You got to be strong. You have to be able to grapple, and you have to be able to stand and bang. And when you look at all the guys, they're all good fighters he's fought recently, but they all come from one discipline. And John Fitch hasn't added all that stuff. Do you think John Fitch, the guys I just named, you think John Fitch would kick the crap out of McDonald, Ellenberger, and Story? And those guys are all down at like 18 to 23 in the world.
I think he would beat them. I don't think kick the crap out of him. No, but I think he would beat him. But there's such a level difference between John Fitch and George St-Pierre, and then Fitch is higher than those guys that I think that's what's causing people to miss.
I did waste a couple seconds at the beginning. Fourth point in the opening round. There is a fight, and that's why, when I throw this out, these other guys have time to develop, win some fights, build their names. There's a guy now who they're going to throw in there. Nick Diaz is going to fight George St-Pierre. It's going to be here in town, UFC 137, October 29th, Mandalay Bay. Start the clock. First off, what do you think of the fight?
I think it's a terrific fight. I mean, I give the UFC a lot of credit. They're making the fight that the fans want to see. People called for Nick Diaz against George St-Pierre. They made it. I'm not so sure that Nick Diaz has the game. How is Nick Diaz going to stay off his back in this fight? Now, he can fight off his back, but George St-Pierre is pretty good on the ground. I'd favor George St-Pierre big in this fight, but I like the idea of making this fight, bringing Nick Diaz into the UFC, bringing him back. He's improved his game. His striking has really become good, and let's see what he can do.
St-Pierre opens offshore as a minus 365 favorite, but Diaz got what he wanted. This is the angle on this one. I think they ran a power play on the UFC and Strikeforce bosses, and they tried to set it up with the boxing thing. I know UFC was open to it, but in the end, it kind of worked.
I don't think there was a power play at all.
No.
I mean, Nick Diaz understood, and his management understood that, he wasn't going to go out there and beat Sergio Martinez or beat some of these guys, maybe a lower level boxer, yeah. But so the point was, he's going to make his money as an MMA fighter because he's a world-class MMA fighter. And if you eliminate, in my mind, George St-Pierre, there's not many people, if anybody, better than Nick Diaz. He's right near the top of the division. I may not make him the number one guy below St-Pierre, but he's not far below that number one guy. And I just find, Steve, that he would not have done particularly well in boxing, and I think they understood that. I don't think there was a power play at all. He is an MMA fighter. He's a very good MMA fighter, and that's which path he chose to go, which only made sense.
Did he force a meeting, change the timing?
I don't think so at all. Don't think so at all. I just think it was, that was all just public consumption.
8-fight deal, no boxing. Cesar Gracie said does not want to go back to Strikeforce. Only way he sees it is if Nick loses the fight.
Well,
last point, opening round. Tough is in town. Tough 13. Again, fans, especially the hardcores, are hard to please. I didn't enjoy the show that much early on because I didn't think enough of the personalities came out. I actually thought it closed out very strongly. Am I wrong? Was Tough 13 not a good season? Did not do well in the ratings.
Yeah, this is one that I wasn't too impressed with. I've always liked The Ultimate Fighter and found it to be a compelling show. This season, not so much. And I don't see any of these guys coming out and standing out as standout fighters, and the personalities were fairly tame, and even the things that happened I thought were kind of forced. And so this was one of those seasons that I thought they kind of missed the mark on. I think it was a shame to waste Brock Lesnar on a season like this, where we didn't really see the kind of Brock that I thought we would see, and there was not a lot of heat between him and Junior Dos Santos.
I still feel like they missed on some things. I think the potential was there. I think there was more with the Lesnar being the hard knocks coach yelling at the guys and kind of talking them down versus Mr. Good Guy. And the other part of it is, Kevin, I talked to Tony Ferguson yesterday and Ramsey Nijam. They both have great personalities.
Well, I'm sure.
Why didn't that come out until outside of like Stripper Thing and Drunken Tony? We didn't see it.
Right. I think it's part of the way the season develops, and I just think that it wasn't one of those years. I think it starts with the coaches, and if there's heat between the coaches, it makes the season a lot better.
Let's look past Tough 14. It's going to be Jason Miller, Michael Bisping. You said last week you don't like it. Down the road, Dana White said the dream is toughs all over the world for a season and then have like a 16 tough World Cup.
I love that. I mean, that would be unbelievable if you can go out and put it together. And they're talking about Philippines and Canada being the first two international versions of Tough. I think it would be terrific because you're going to create new fans. You're going to engage people around the world. And it's going to be something that, people are going to be talking about and they're going to be debating. Hey, look at the passion the Filipino fans have for Manny Pacquiao. And I think you'll see that translate into MMA as a star develops.
I hadn't heard that idea of the World Cup thing. How would they execute it? It really is intriguing. I mean, you could see that has been Dana's dream because he's talked about sport becoming like soccer and having international flair, feeder, countries just everywhere.
Well, I think the interesting point there, Steve, would be, and you're going to have to do it in one weight division, I would think, right? So, and then you'd have to do 8 countries. So I think you have to start with 64 fighters in one division, right? And that really becomes big. Let's say they do 170 and you have 8 fighters in the U.S., 8 fighters in the Philippines, 8 fighters in Canada, 8 fighters in the U.K., et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have those fights, you come out with one winner from each country. Then you bring those 8 guys together and you have them for the Tough World Grand Prix. And I think that would be a huge winner, and it would be a lot of fun to follow the field whittling down.
Would you televise the early stages of the whittling down, or is that the whole internet concept?
Well, I think what it's going to be is you will have each country have their televised in their country, and then all the fights will be available on the internet because of contracts and whatnot, but they'll be available on the internet. So if we're in the U.S., we may not be able to see the Canadian shows on TV, but we can watch them online. We're not going to be able to see the Filipino shows on TV, but we can watch them online. And you're going to develop a fan base. And theoretically, then, if you have the finals in the U.S., let's say, the U.S. fans have been following the U.S. fighter, they're going to be rooting for that U.S. fighter against the Filipino fighter or the Canadian, whoever it is. And I think it just creates there's a lot of good things that can come out of this, not the least of which is I think the more fights you have, the better chance young guys have to develop, and then that gives you a better chance to get more stars.
2011 is a huge transitional period for the UFC because they're in a position now, I think for the first time ever, to really dictate a huge TV deal on multiple platforms. They're talking about 6 months. If they leave Spike, Dana White was talking about having a notebook full of TV concepts. Do you see the day where Tough goes away?
No. Okay. I think, maybe the format the way it is now goes away. Maybe they tweak the format some way. But I don't think Tough goes away because, forget about the TV ratings and everything else. Look at the quality of fighters that they've gotten out of Tough. You've got 3 fighters who have won championships, Forrest Griffin, Rashad Evans, Matt Serra. You've had other guys like Ryan Bader, Diego Sanchez, Josh Koscheck, very good top quality contenders that have come out of that show. It is a great feeder system for them, and I think it's going to stay. It's not going to go away. They may tweak the format, it may come out differently, but we're not going to see the end of Tough.
And I throw that out there as an idea. I don't think it should go away, and I do believe that as the sport spreads across the U.S. and the world, there's going to be more fighters. There's going to be more.
Right.
There's going to be more prospects than ever. That's Kevin Iole. You can follow him on Twitter at Kevin I. Write something nice. You can follow me at Steve Cofield. You can follow our producer Reynolds at Reynolds2305. I'll tell you there's more on the way because I actually saw a mini Anthony Pettis this week that we'll tell you about. We've got Shane Carwin coming up. We've got Kenny Florian coming up. It's the MMA Insiders, brought to you by the Las Vegas Fight Shop and PTs.